What's next year?
65.
Well, it happens whether we know it or not. We want it to come on.
Uh-huh.
You know, with some, with nothing else.
Yeah, and it's fun. You got it.
So we're just, all the above. All the above. Y'all know Tony has been out of town.
Yeah, went to the beach, for girls.
When she got back. Did you have a good birthday?
Yes, I did.
Now, next year's gonna be
It looks
big.
so nice. I've got pictures. She said,
Yes.
I'm gonna have a visit next year too.
Oh? Okay.
Next year, she will aid it.
No.
Yeah, she said she was gonna give me bed and all that, and everything. She sent me pictures of the closet, bathroom, so they must have done it. Wow. Where did you do it?
And you must have done this stuff.
No, no. No, next year.
Oh,
Good.
I'm fine. Not we have. Merry Christmas.
Ride more cruise, don't you?
On the expressway?
On the red side. Oh.
Well, good.
Great.
Good news.
Get your bed.
It's an all-star lineup, Louisa's powerful. Your class or invitation, I think.
No, my anxiety today, I sat there and laughed. Well, I was looking for you, it is.
You feel that way too, huh? That beach is safe. See, that's why I like to come out with these photographs and stuff. They're pretty hard. I gotta go to Mike and breakfast. I'm looking for love too. There's a friend of mine, he's down Mississippi, he raises snakes. Copperhead, water moccasins, he's got them all. He's a snake expert.
You get that on 30 well.
They go well.
That's where it's bottled. The blue bottle is ASW, whatever, that's that round place. I wonder that, cargo costs nothing, but that's the size of that black.
Yes, white sugar is their favorite.
Say they all the time.
Okay, Wayne, I think you're up. It's your turn.
You just check it out, brother.
All right. Meantime, heading into chapter 9, what are the highlights? When you gonna plan to listen?
No, I was wondering, when are you gonna play?
Yeah. See, that way I know when to come down.
I figured you'd want to go.
I go after the Ag Center like that. Biggest softball out there. Wherever they grow.
I used to try to bring out. I looked it up and they can be yeah.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Good to see everybody out on a Wednesday night. I hope everybody's week is going well. We will start out with a word of prayer. Kurt, do you mind leading us in a word of prayer?
Right. Heavenly Father, we ask that you watch over and protect us as we come together to study that word. May we rightly divide the word together. May we take it from its ability to teach others to the best of our ability. Be with Matt's mom as she has a speedy recovery, Father. Continue to be with Stacy. Watch over Cecilia Irwin. Be with her. There are many of our number who are sick and ill. We ask that you watch over them and protect them. Be with our preachers in foreign lands spreading the word. Realize, Father, that some obstacles, difficulties, help them overcome and endure. And be with the world leaders of peaceful reign. We ask all these things in His name. Amen.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we are finishing up actually in Matthew chapter 8 tonight. We'll try to get through, we'll definitely get through 8 and we'll see how much of 9 that we can get through. Remember, we are kind of, one said, hey, I want to follow you. And Jesus says, well, I don't boxes have holes and birds have nests, but Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. So Jesus was telling these two people, this one specifically, that look, if you follow me, there's going to be consequences. Not necessarily consequences, but there could be a lifestyle that you have to, if you truly commit to me, that you may not want to endure. Then he has, was that you? Yeah. Okay, I was like, is that the TV? I was like, the TV was doing weird things. I was like, wait a second, that just talk to me there. Yeah, then we have a scribe come to Jesus and ask about burying his father, and Jesus, tells him, let the dead bury the dead, which really we talked about was more of an excuse. We think about the cost of discipleship and what excuses do we make in our service to God on a weekly basis. Do we have other things that get in our way? The rich young ruler had wealth and things of this world that got in his way. Jesus told him to sell all those things and give to the poor. That was obviously something that he had a problem with and he couldn't do. So I think for an application standpoint, as we think about cost of discipleship, how well are we doing in that area? Are we letting other things get in our way of truly following Jesus? We mentioned this throughout the whole section here. We have these great multitudes that follow Jesus, and just because they follow Jesus doesn't mean they were true disciples of Jesus or that they truly committed to Him. So, any comments on anything on chapter 8 so far, that section? So, the next section we see chapter 8, verse 23 through 27. Jesus here, he gets in a boat and he's going to go across the Sea of Galilee. And why did Jesus rebuke the disciples for being little faith when they awoke him in the boat? Why did he rebuke them?
They didn't believe he was God, and the waves couldn't overtake him.
Yeah. So I mean, they were in a scary situation. This is my horrible drawing of the Sea of Galilee. John and Missy Ware, they're not here, but they saw this. They were at Capernaum, which was right here in this area. So we have a 13-mile north and south. We have an 8-mile east and west, and they're on the Sea of Galilee, and it's getting really rough. These are hills. Apparently, there were hills on either side, and you had this wind draft that would come down and create these really rough waves. So it would funnel winds in and create, again, that turmoil. So what profession were some of the disciples? They were fishermen. So, you know, we think about this, they would have obviously experienced rough seas or rough currents at times, but apparently this was bad enough where they were fearful. And they go down and wake up Jesus, and, you know, we talk about, you know, for us looking at this saying, well, you know, they should have known Jesus would help them. And it's one thing looking at this and discerning it and thinking, being in it in the moment. I think we understand that. And how would we respond to that? It's hard to say, but it's interesting that the Mark 4 account of this says that Jesus told them, look, let us cross over to the other side. Let's get the boat crossed over to the other side, not let us go to the middle of the lake and drown. You know, he didn't tell them that. But at the same sense, again, you're in a dramatic situation like this, and, you know, we don't know how we would respond. But they go to Jesus. He rebukes them for their faith or their lack of faith, and then he calms the waters. And then why did the disciples marvel at Jesus when he calmed the wind and the sea?
Didn't believe he was able.
They might not have believed that he was able to do it. It would have been such a probably dramatic event. Obviously, they were fishermen. Storms really didn't react like that. Just stop all at once and have this calmness. You know, they would have subsided slowly over time. Just like we see any storm, especially if you're in the water's still disruptive. And, you know, when Jesus does this, we see that it stops immediately and the waters were calm. And obviously they marvel at this. And again, they're seeing Jesus' true power here. They're seeing these miracles. Now they see his control over nature. So they're seeing his ultimate control over physical things, spiritual things. And obviously that would have been something to marvel at, as the scriptures talk about. Everything is subject to his will, as we'll see more as we go on through chapter 9 and we start looking at these other miracles. So well, let's talk about the two demons. The two demon possessed. Man, any comments on that?
Yes. Yeah, just say it kind of, I don't know what the right literary term is, but I mean, it's indicative of all the other miracles that he did, and that it was immediate.
Correct.
It wasn't like he got up and said, hey, the storm's going to pass, and 20 minutes later or 30 minutes later.
Right. Yeah.
And that is consistent with the other things that he did, was there was an immediate reaction.
Yeah, and I'm not, by any stretch of the imagination, a sailor. I have been on deep sea boats where I can still see the shore. And, you know, I mean, it was in Florida, but, I mean, when you get out there in the water, I mean, the waves can be pretty rough. I mean, this was just a regular day, but, you know, seeing something like that, I know had to really, again, amaze them of what you're saying. So, would have been very interesting. You know, you think about, hey, when I'm in heaven, I want to ask God to do a replay of these situations, you know. And I just wonder, some of these that we see, you know, we read over them because we've read them so many times. It's like, yeah, he healed the paralytic man. He talked about this. He did this. And, I mean, I just think something like this, when you see nature, and like you guys were talking about it because y'all were there, you can't see from this side to this side. You said you could see across it. Yeah. This is a big body of water. Yeah. And obviously, you know, we're talking about the winds coming in off the hill. So, you know, having power over nature, this would have been something they've obviously never seen before, and it would have been, again, quite a feat to see that. Anybody else? Yes.
I was going to say, if they had truly had faith and believed who Jesus was, they wouldn't have even had to wake him up, because they would have realized that the sea's not going to hurt him. It won't. The sea has no power over Jesus, and you're in the boat with him.
Yeah.
And so if they had, and that may be why he rebuked them, not necessarily that they didn't believe he could calm the storm, but that they even woke him up to begin with, because they were scared because they thought they were in danger.
Yeah.
And if they had known who he was
Yeah.
and believed and had the faith,
Right.
they would have just let him.
Because was he concerned about it?
No.
He obviously wasn't concerned about it. No.
Yeah, but I think that's the point, though, right? He rebuked them for being fearful.
Good point. Yeah.
Think about this.
Yeah,
about being
fearful.
fearful.
Mm-hmm.
He rebuked them because they were fearful, although they were with him. And so the message for us is, if we're truly walking with God, then we should not be fearful in our situation, right? Situation is a situation. You may dislike it. It may be uncomfortable. You may even hate it because why do I have to go through it, right? go through those different cycles, but to be fearful of that situation, even if it's a situation that kills us, if we're walking with God, we shouldn't be fearful of that.
True.
We should be
Yeah.
knowing we're going to be with God.
Very true, but difficult to
100%.
enact. Yeah, exactly. So we see Jesus go across. It says to the other side, to the country of Gergenes, or however you want to say that. And we have these two demon-possessed men that come out and confront Jesus. And why were they afraid of Jesus, or the demons afraid of Jesus?
They knew the power he had.
They knew the power he was. They knew who he was. They confessed him as what? Jesus, the Son of God.
Yes.
And they knew that it probably wasn't going to turn out well for them.
They knew that they had a time already.
Yeah.
That this showdown was about to jump off.
Yeah.
And that's why they asked the question of, you come here. First of all, what do we do?
Right.
There's the first question. But why are you coming after us? And then they say, you come here to torment us before the time. That means there's going to be a time they're going to be tormented. Why are you coming early? Why are you coming early?
Good point. Yeah. Yeah, James 2:19, even the demons believe and tremble. And what do they ask of Jesus?
Well, put us in the
Yeah, let us have an escape over here. And they go into Sardis wine, and we know the story that goes off into the sea. And, it's interesting how the city responds. It says in verse 34, the whole city comes out to meet him. What do they want him to do? Yeah, they want him to leave. And, they don't necessarily... It's interesting how the multitudes respond to Jesus as we go through all these miracles. Some accept. We see obviously the Jewish leaders definitely don't want to believe. And then we see others that believe and take hold and have faith. But in this situation, they didn't look at these men. They didn't go, hey, look at these men. We know who they are. We know of them. And now they're healed. Wow, what a great miracle. Come into our city and teach us. Help us understand. Help us grow our faith. They don't do that. They're like, hey, you need to leave. They were just looking at it from hey, this guy could cause problems, or, maybe financially he's going to mess us up. So they beg him to depart from the region. So I kind of found that interesting how people respond to this. Now, how would you respond to what Jesus did? We read this again, like I was talking earlier, but it's interesting to see or think about, hey, if I would have seen a lot of this, or maybe if Jesus would have come to Memphis and started doing all these things, would we automatically believe? Would we accept that? What if you lived in Nazareth and Jesus grew up 2 doors down from you, or Jesus was in your first grade Mrs. Smith, English class, and you knew him, and 30 years fast forward, and now he's healing people and he's doing these miracles. Just that's the way my mind thinks. It's like, how would I have responded? I mean, for me, when you see a lot of this, and you would have heard, it's hard to deny. It's hard to say that, hey, this guy's a fraud, or this, I don't believe this, or I don't know. It's just the way I think. Anybody have a comment on that before we go into chapter 9?
So I may be mistaken, but my impression, I think, is that one side was predominantly Jewish, and the other side was predominantly Gentile.
Yeah, and this thought because the swine.
So when they went, when they went, like on the Jewish side, there was all kinds of scripture and the Messiah and more of a religious focus. And when he went to the other side, which is the Gentile side, that maybe there wasn't that focus, and they were just looking at, hey, we had all these hogs and now we don't, versus looking for some sort of fulfillment.
True, Messiah. Good point.
Plus they got it hearsay. The
Right.
guys went
Right.
to the city and told everybody, right? And then that's what people came back, and then they said, can you leave? So we don't know how that narrative was really told, right? The truth is always somewhere in the middle. We don't know exactly how they expressed what they expressed. They told us events, but we don't know how it came across, what light it painted Jesus.
Yeah.
Because we're on Jesus' side, so we look at it as,
Right.
wow, look what he did.
Exactly.
For somebody else, they're going to hear a different view, and that's to come out,
Yeah, and it's interesting as we get into chapter 9, Jesus doesn't force his gospel on those people. They say, hey, you need to leave. He doesn't say, wait, time out. Do you see what I did here to these men? I healed them. Let me come into your city and teach you and talk to you. He doesn't force his gospel on them or us. So I think that's important. It's there. He wishes all would come to repentance, but he doesn't seem, in this situation anyway, according to Scripture, he doesn't seem to really say, wait a second, let's talk about this. I just thought that was interesting. Yes?
It's really interesting. In this passage, we have 3 different fearful responses to Jesus. We have the disciples in the boat being afraid because they didn't know who Jesus was. Then we see the demons being afraid because they did know who Jesus was. And then we have this last group who maybe just don't have the entire picture and still their response is fear.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. Yeah, that is. Okay. Anybody else? All right, so let's get into chapter 9 here, and verses, again, we see Jesus goes across, and immediately, verses 2 through 8, he runs in to this paralytic man, and we see a different account of this in Mark and Luke. Mark tells us that this man was carried by 4 men, and then we're probably more familiar with the Luke account where they have to open up the top of the roof, and they let this man down in the house where Jesus was. And so, Jesus encounters this man, and then what does Jesus say that gets a lot of negative pushback from some of the scribes to this particular? What does he say to this particular man that gets a lot of negative response? Your sins are forgiven. And these scribes, obviously, when they heard that, that was going to really set them off. And again, Jesus here is asserting his authority of deity by telling this man his sins are forgiven. I mean, and what do the scribes accuse him of? Blasphemy. Okay, so it's very interesting. As we see in Matthew, this is kind of the first thing they charge him with is blasphemy. And then we see it again. It's going to be the last thing they charge him with in Matthew chapter 26. In Matthew 26:65. So Jesus goes on. So how does he demonstrate that he has the power to forgive sins? He heals him. Okay? And what's even more interesting to me, it's interesting and it should probably be a little bit scary to all of us. In verse 4, Jesus knows the hearts of these scribes. Because once he tells them what they're thinking, you would think that they would kind of go, wow, how did he know that? That would give them, in my opinion, it should have given them some type of pause of like, wow, he knew exactly what I was thinking. Turn over to John chapter 1 and verse 47 through 49 real quick. And we'll see the opposite of somebody has a different response to this. John 1, 47 through 49, please.
Jesus saw
That's right.
Nathanael
Mm-hmm.
coming to him and saith to him, Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no guile. Nathanael said to him, Whence thou knowest me? Jesus answered and said to him, Before that Philip called thee, when thou wast under the fig tree, I saw thee. Nathanael answered and said unto him, Rabbi, thou art the Son of God, thou art the King of Israel.
So here, Jesus tells Nathanael only something really he knew about himself, so to speak. And Nathanael's response is totally different than Christ. He's like, wow, Son of God, I believe, Rabbi. And we see the hearts of these men, which is, what is their heart in verse 4? Evil in their hearts. And so, again, what if Jesus looked at all our hearts right now? What would he see? I mean, I think that's something we have to think about every day. What kind of shape are our hearts in? Because ultimately we see that the springs of life come from our heart, as Proverbs talks about. So, again, I think that should be a very sobering message for us as Christians. We may be able to put up a facade to people here at the building or out in society, but, we're an open book to God. He knows our hearts. He knows how we feel about each other. He knows how we feel about mankind, so to speak. So I think that, again, should be somewhat of a motivator and a factor of not having an evil heart. Any comments on that?
So what was the problem with the scribes? I mean, here they were legalistic in the law, and transcribing manuscripts and what have you. Do you feel that they just were not for Christ?
Yeah, yes, and I think Christ was taking any part of their, fame or any part. He's pulling all these multitudes, and that was something that they were the quote, religious leaders or doctors of the day, and they obviously weren't going to like somebody pulling their attention or their audience away from them. It's just my opinion. And obviously, once they see the power that Jesus has, it's interesting. We talk about these blind men that he heals in the end of chapter 9. These were learned men of the law and doctors of religion, and they couldn't see that these blind men call him the son of David, the messianic son of David. The blind men could see that, hey, this man in the person is Jesus. But these Pharisees and scribes that know the law, know the prophecies, they can't see it. They don't want to see it. Again, I think it's part of their power, and they just don't want to accept Jesus as a poor man from Nazareth is the true Messiah, son of David. Yes.
Part of the history from back in that time was also that these were the people who were concerned with the minutia of
True. Yeah.
obeying the law.
The jot and tittle.
The jot and tittle.
Yeah.
And it was their job to see the trees and not the forest.
That's good.
So they had yes, there was an overall knowledge of we are looking for the Messiah, but it wasn't in their purview. They weren't really thinking a Messiah is coming. This is just another, fraudster coming out, because there were sorcerers, there were people that
True.
did things
Yep.
all along the way.
Yep.
And it was hard for them to get past, what do we have to do minute to minute to minute to minute to obey this law. So I think that was maybe part of what was going on, not so much of this can't be the Messiah. I think they couldn't concentrate on that because they were really into what they were supposed to be doing.
Okay. Yep.
They were very legalistic, in other words.
Yes.
You say they were into it.
Well, their law was that way.
So they're,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jesus came explaining that law in a different way that they didn't understand.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
yeah.
To your
yeah.
point,
Exactly.
they're looking at it, click, 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 click,
Uh-huh.
and Jesus is now saying, let me explain to you the click behind that.
Yeah.
And then he's laying it out while keeping the law, which is crazy. He kept the law and then brought them to understand what we now are under, right?
Yeah, he's going to be talking about a new law as
Yeah.
well, which they didn't, that was not going to be something that, again, that would help them lose with their status of the law. So, then we see, the Holy Spirit through Matthew here, 9 through 13. Talk about Matthew. It says verse 9, and Jesus passed on from there and he saw a what? Does your version say tax collector? Mine says a man.
A man.
Yeah.
Yes,
Well, it's just interesting. I thought it was kind of interesting. Jesus saw a man here named Matthew. He's at the tax office. But, we would probably look at this a little different because we tend to go through this lens of what people, are. We would say, hey, there's the IRS agent or there's the politician or through our, prejudice, there's the color or there's the, whatever. But Matthew, being a tax collector, is not going to have a good reputation with these Jews, obviously. And it would have been easy for Jesus to kind of fall right into line with that and go, hey, there's Matthew, the tax collector. But again, he just says, hey, he saw a man. And we just talked about Jesus knows our heart. So he asked Matthew to follow him. Matthew obviously does that. And then what reason did Jesus give for eating with the tax collectors and sinners?
12 and 13.
Okay, read that for us, sir.
And Jesus heard that, said to them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance.
Okay, so yeah, we're familiar with this. I think we understand that, and really, verse 13 is a quote from Hosea 6:6, which really compares these leaders to the lawless priesthood of Hosea's time, which they would have been familiar with this section, this old law of Hosea. They would have known what Jesus was doing here and would have not been happy to be made that comparison out of. That would have not gone over well with them. So, one thing that's interesting, if we are going to be the salt of the world, we have to come in contact with the world. We talked about that in the past, and are we, preaching the word? That's our theme. And we talk about preaching and teaching. We can preach and teach and help each other grow, like in this setting with fellow Christians. But ultimately, Jesus is going to see this need at the end of chapter 9. He has compassion on the multitudes because there's such a need for teaching and preaching. And so that's when he institutes, or basically calls out the 12 apostles and sends them out, because he sees this huge need to go out and preach and teach. And so our question is, do we see that same need? Do we have that sense of urgency of preaching and teaching people that are lost or sinners?
That's what verse 12 is keen on, though. He's basically saying, look, I'm not worried about those that are well.
Yeah.
I'm here for the sick.
Right.
That's what he told us to do. Go out there and get after the sick, right? Quit spending your time focusing on the well. Get out there around the sick, because there's plenty of field out there, but I don't have enough laborers. So we can be in here all day talking about it. We can go out there and be about it.
Yeah.
That's what that
Amen.
verse, Matthew 28
Yeah.
translates.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
It's also, not strange, it's not the word, but he called upon Matthew, and Matthew, he said, follow me, and Matthew immediately followed him. Next thing you know, they're in a house, and there's other tax collectors and sinners there as well. It could be that Matthew invited them once he had heard the word.
I think that's a good assumption, yeah. And I think that shows Matthew and his heart, and, saying, hey, come see this guy, Again, it's do we have that same enthusiasm of that call to discipleship, showing people about Jesus and telling people about Jesus, and that excitement to tell others? I think that's a applicable question for us as Christians.
I remember being a teenager and a girl down the street.
I don't.
I wanted to be friends with the girl down the street that probably I didn't need to be friends with because she wasn't that great. And I remember telling my mom, but he ate with sinners and tax collectors and homicides. And my mom said that when my best friends were the apostles, I could too.
That's good. That's good. We'll have to high five Diane for that one. Yeah. All right, so the next section, Jesus gets questioned about fasting in 14 through 17. It's probably a good assumption that these are some of the same leaders that are questioning Jesus about why he was eating with tax collectors and sinners, who are now questioning him about fasting. And, most of what history tells us is the Pharisees would fast twice a week. And a lot of times, they would do that. We see throughout Scripture they would do that to be seen of men. But why did Jesus tell them it's not appropriate for his disciples to be fasting at that time?
For one thing, they weren't mourning him because he was still with them.
Exactly. And they, he told them exactly what he said, Lynn, and they probably don't understand the full extent of what he meant when he said, those days will come and the bridegroom will be taken away from them. But yeah, he's still there. So in his mind, he's saying, why do they need to fast? So he goes on, and what did he mean when he uses these analogies of new cloth and old garment and the new wine and the wineskins?
Oh, the new garment.
Exactly. I mean, it's basically that simple. Jesus is not saying, hey, I'm not going to bring this new covenant, so to speak, of Christianity and slap it on this old law of tradition and jot and tittle, what you're talking about. It doesn't work. They're going to tear apart. That's not what I'm here. Same thing for the new wine and the old vessel or whatever it was he's talking about there. So, any comments on those two sections?
Yeah, when you're fasting and praying, you're trying to get closer to God, but they had God.
Yeah. Now, is there anything wrong with fasting? I'm not up here saying there is. So I think we all understand that, like you're saying, I think people that, some people are very used to fasting, and it's part of a devotion, and I'm buffeting my body as a sacrifice. I'm going to commit to the study and fasting, and that is a very, I mean, a good thing, and I think a lot of us, or all of us, would agree with that if it helps us. But I don't think we can.
But they had God.
Exactly at that time, yes.
Like,
Yes.
They didn't have to.
Yeah.
They were close to him as they could be.
Yep. I was going to read this section, but I think we're going to just talk about it. This 18 through 26. Here we have this, the first time that we see in Matthew that Jesus resurrects or brings somebody back from the dead. We have this synagogue ruler who we see in other accounts. His name is Jairus, and he has this daughter that has just died. And this will be the first of three events where Jesus is going to raise someone from the dead. We have this one, Jairus' daughter just died. Then the son of the widow of Nain had been dead longer and was being carried to the tomb. And Lazarus had been dead and buried for 4 days. So you got to remember, what I read was the Jews did not embalm. So usually when somebody died, the burial was really quick. And Jesus also is going to delegate this power of raising from the dead to his apostles. We'll see that in chapter 10 and verse 8. And we also know in Acts 9 where Peter raised Dorcas from the dead. So he's on the way to the ruler's house, and we see an account of this woman with a flow of blood. And why did she kind of secretly, he doesn't say secretly, but why did she kind of come up from behind and touch Jesus' garment?
Because the law says she was unclean.
Yes.
It becomes interesting because why did Jesus recognize that? Either Jesus felt something or Jesus feels when true faith is true faith. Which that's my personal belief.
Right.
That's the scripture don't say that. I'm just translating how I look at it.
Yeah, and I think, there's a theory or possibility that this woman, was suffering from some menstrual disorder. Deuteronomy 24:1 is what Brent is referring to, or Leviticus 12 and Leviticus 15 talk about the uncleanness. And menstruating women were not allowed to participate in the Passover. And so she would have been unclean, and it probably would have resulted in some type of segregation for her for a long period of time. So you can kind of imagine, what she's thinking in her mind as we see her thinking, if I can just get up and touch him, I'll be healed. And I think that goes back to her faith in verse 21. And she knew that the slightest contact with Jesus was going to heal her and make her whole. So, interesting, again, we see these levels of faith, strong faith, and we see people reject. So I think that's a constant reminder of, hey, how strong is my heart? How strong is my faith? We know we're not going to be perfect all the time, but I think it's a level of self-examination and saying, hey, how can I do better? I don't feel like I'm as strong as I need to. Maybe I need to study more. Maybe I need to fast. And, so your mileage may vary. So you think about where you are and continue to make those improvements. So we see Jesus arrive at the ruler's house. And go ahead. Sorry.
And the Bible says, and that woman was made well from that hour.
Yes.
That's supposed to mean something to us. I mean.
Absolutely. She was healed. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So when Jesus gets to the ruler's house, why did he get ridiculed from the people? What did he say? Yeah. They're in their mourning. It's a, kind of a formalized thing, like when we would have a funeral at somebody's house. Obviously, we're mourning for the loss of this person. This guy comes in and says, hey, she's just sleeping, and he pushes everybody out, and he takes her by the hand, and, she's raised. And you see that the report of this went out into all the land. So, like we talked about, people seeing these things, and you see somebody raised from the dead, it's kind of hard to imagine how you're undecided after seeing something like this. Especially, think about if that was your daughter. Think about if that was your sister or your cousin. What impact would that have on you? I think it would be obviously very impactful.
Well, they didn't have communications back then.
Yeah, he couldn't pick up the phone and say, wow, yeah.
Hey.
Yeah. You couldn't send a text out, a group text to everybody, right?
No. It was not that way.
Yeah. All right. Any comments on that section?
It's really interesting how rapid succession all of this is. I've never realized this before, that Jesus is on his way to go heal, to raise the girl from the dead, and he's interrupted by this other woman. And then it says in verse 27, after he left that girl's home, then he heals 2 blind men. And then in verse 32, when they left, a demon-possessed man who couldn't speak was brought to Jesus. It's like, I mean, I imagine this all happened in one day, maybe very shortly after each other, where it's just like boom, boom, boom. And the people who are all right there watching all of these happen back to back to back to back. I mean, 4 incredible miracles. How lucky.
Yeah,
and all of them.
Exactly. And then how do you say, wow, this guy's a fraud, or this guy's some kind of sorcerer? You know, how do you say that? How do you reason that in your mind after seeing this? And just, you know, if you're watching Jesus doing that, you're seeing his character as, like we're going to see now, these 2 blind men, he's touching them, and he touches their eyes. We saw with the leper last week, he's touching a leper. He has compassion for people. So you see his character, I think, come out in addition to his power. And I think that's obviously got to be something that had to be truly impactful and, like you were saying, very amazing to see. And I agree that, you know, this is like rapid fire type situation, what he's doing here. So
that's why he said, seeing you do not see.
Very true.
That's the point. How in the world did you miss this?
Right.
Right? Like they say, clack, clack, clack. You would, I mean, look, us reading this, we're tripping because, wow. Them singing it would have been absolutely bonkers.
Mm-hmm.
But you sing it and not believing it, that's crazy.
Even more bonkers. Yeah, exactly.
But then you've got verse 34 where the leaders that you've grown up with, who've led your faith, are twisting it and whispering.
Yeah.
And you've been with them for so long.
Trying to discredit them.
Yep. So.
Yep. And that kind of, I mean, we just kind of talked about we got about 5 minutes. You know, we see this next section of the 2 blind men. And what do they say that shows they had some type of knowledge about Jesus?
They believe he can do this.
They say, Son of David, have mercy on us. And Son of David being that messianic term, you know, they obviously had some type of faith. And he kind of pulls them aside. He questions it a little bit. You know, do you believe that I'm able to do this? And obviously they don't hesitate, and they say yes. And, you know, they're healed. And then, you know, he says, see that no one knows. And obviously, when we see that, a lot of times the next verse, they departed and the news spreads about him even more so. Like I was talking earlier, it's just interesting here that these blind men, you know, knew about, they can't see Jesus, but they believe in him. And like Brent was just saying, you have all these people, especially the leaders, that are seeing Jesus and seeing what he's doing, but yet they're not going to believe. Isaiah 35 is a good messianic prophecy of this. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, talking about these type situations. We'll see Jesus heal more blind people along the way. And then he goes straight in, and we see him heal this particular, this man who is mute, and this man speaks. And so, again, another one, like we were saying, just rapid fire. And then we see this, another thing I was talking about earlier. Jesus went all the cities and villages, teaching in the synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, healing every sickness and every disease among the people. So there's this emphasis on preaching and teaching that Jesus does. Great example, lesson for us. Again, I would love to see, you know, how many people did he actually heal? We know that John tells us that all the miracles aren't, you know, mentioned, but you think about all these towns and areas that he's going to, y'all could probably speak to it firsthand. You know, there's just no telling how long, you know, or how many people that he actually healed and how that news would have traveled. But Jesus has compassion for the multitude. It says that in the next verse. Why does he have compassion for them? Because they're weary and scattered like sheep, having no shepherd. And I think he's seeing what the Jewish leaders are trying to teach. And so he sees this need, and that's when he goes on and talks about this harvest is is truly plentiful, but the labors are few. And so then, you know, we talk about praying for laborers, and then this next chapter, he's going to try to have some kind of remedy for that by sending out the apostles to help go out and preach and work on that harvest. So,
hey Rob, that compassion is a spiritual compassion, right? There's physical compassion that we can have for people.
Good point.
Jesus has a spiritual compassion.
I think he had both, but yes.
Yeah, absolutely think
right.
he had both, right? We see him,
Yeah.
I think he was fully rounded, but I think right here, where
Absolutely
he
for this
sees
house.
them as scattered without
Yeah.
a shepherd, and that's a great lesson for us about, again, going out into the world and being focused and having compassion on those people who think that they understand God, think that they know God, but they don't know him, and, you know, things they don't see here and they don't hear, and how do we help them? And why do we just look at them like, who cares? Because these are souls that
Right.
need to be saved, and we have duty around that.
Yeah, and Jesus obviously saw that and, you know, saw that compassion or saw that need. And hopefully we can see that same thing and react the same way by preaching and teaching. We got a couple of minutes left. Any comments on that? We were able to kind of catch up.
Rob, I had something that I just think is interesting back in talking about healing the two blind men when Jesus told them to, it says, see that no one knows about it, but
Yeah.
they went away and spread his fame. How would they explain their eyesight if they were not supposed to tell anybody what happened? All of a sudden they can
Right.
see, so it's kind of was Jesus using reverse psychology on us?
Yeah.
Don't tell anyone, knowing they would go blab it or they would have to explain it. I don't know. I just think that's very interesting how they would explain being able to see all of a sudden.
Yeah, and if they were one of your family members, obviously you're going to be talking about it. You know, wow, my mom, you know, now she can see, you know, and it was. So it wasn't just related to them. I think it was definitely a whole domino outshoot.
He said the same thing to the leper.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So I'm out of town Sunday. I think Clay's out of town. So you're going to have one of the best guest speaker teachers in the world named Brett Mohair. He will be here and he will enlighten you on chapter 10 of Matthew. So please be prepared for that. Thank you for your comments.
Always enjoy your class. Be prepared,
Thank you, Rob. I know.
Thank you. Yeah, I need to get you off here. You need to bring the pictures, man. You can put them on here. We can go.
Good, yeah.
Hey, here's 50 y'all walking on the same place. Look, they're walking on the water.
We went to the depth, the deepest part where Jesus took.
That was one of the deals that this guy does it every time he takes a group. We get this boat, or he gets this boat, and he tells the captain, "I want to go to the deepest part of the Sea of Galilee because it matches where he took Peter to the deepest part." And so the captain loves it because he has this depth finder, and he goes, what was it? It was 80.
But back then it probably was more because you were talking about the things
yeah.
wrong.
It has the water.
But it was
there
one of
as
those
well.
things that it's like, okay, if you're a fisherman, there's a whole bunch of stuff around that passage, but like if you're a fisherman, the last place you're going to go
is the deepest
part in the middle of the day,
right?
because it's going to be hot and all the fish are going to be deep.
Way down.